All right, let's say our La'asok B'divrei Torah blessing together. Baruch atah
Baruch
Adonai
atah Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech haolam asher
Hashem
mitzotav vanu sok b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy through commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. So words of Torah are going to come from the second part of the Bible, the Nevi'im section, specifically from the book of Joshua. However, we're going to start with a picture today. So these are date trees, date palms. Above, at the top of the trunks, you can see what looks like a ring. Those are clusters of dates. This is a picture that I took about a year ago, June last year, in Israel, near the city of Jericho, or the site of the ancient city of Jericho, near the Dead Sea. So Jericho in the Bible is described as Ir HaTamarim, the city of date trees, or the city of dates. And it's one of the oldest inhabited sites in the world. And that's because it's near the Jordan River, so there's water to drink. And the soil is good for growing dates, which means that there's a food supply and there's something to trade with other people who are passing through who might have other resources. So Jericho is very old and very well situated, and it's because of the date trees. However, when the Crusaders came through in basically the 1100s, they cut down all of the date trees of the land of Israel. And so when the date trees came back, the dates that you can get in Israel today that are grown in Israel are either Deglet Nor or Medjool dates, and they are date types that came to Israel by way of America. So that is the situation with the date trees today. You can find dates near the city of dates, near Jericho. And since our story takes place in Jericho, this gives us a sense of what the site looks like today, or the neighborhood at least. All right. Jim, would you read Rahab on 1 foot, please?
Okay. Rahab, alternately Rahab or pronounced Rahab in Hebrew, was a prostitute around 1200 BCE in the city of Jericho, in the land of Israel. She lived there at a time when Joshua and the Israelites were camped across the Jordan River. Although this is not in the Bible, the Talmudic rabbis imagine that she later married Joshua and was the ancestor of the prophet Huldah.
Thank you. All right. So we've got some sense of who we're talking about at this point. Now we can get into our story. All right, Naomi, would you read Act 1, please?
Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 men from Shittim as spies, saying, "Go, reconnoiter the region of Jericho." So they set out and they came to the house of a certain prostitute named Rahab and lodged there. The king of Jericho was told, "Some men have come here tonight, Israelites, to spy out the country." The king of Jericho thereupon sent orders to Rahab, "Produce the men who came to you and enter your house, for they have come to spy out the whole country." The woman, however, had taken the 2 men and hidden them. "It is true," she said, "the men did come to me, but I did not know where they were from. And at dark, when the gate was about to be closed, the men left. I don't know where the men went. Quick, go after them, for you can overtake them." Now she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under some stalks of flax that she had lying on the roof. So the men pursued them in the direction of the Jordan down to the fords, and no sooner had the pursuers gone out than the gate was shut behind them.
Thank you. And would you please read our context in our first question?
This is from the biblical book of Joshua, right after Joshua takes over from Moses. That story, Joshua 1, is the Haftarah for Simchat Torah. It ties the story of the spies sent by Moses in Numbers 13 and 14, and in fact is the Haftarah for that story in Parashat Shelach. In the first spy story, there are 12 spies, all named, and 10 give a negative report, while 2 give an optimistic report. The 2 who believe in themselves and in God are Joshua and Caleb. Thus, they get to go into the land of Israel, with Joshua now the leader. 1. History in stories is not inevitable. People and authors make choices. At what points could this part of the story have turned out differently?
Thank you. And also, just to be clear why we're doing this story tonight of all nights, this coming Shabbat is Parshat Shalach. When we read the story of the spies in the Haftorah, is the story that we're looking at today. So, should you be in shul, any shul, this coming Shabbat, the story may look a little familiar in the Haftorah. And now we'll have had a chance to dig into it. So how could this, at what points could this story might have turned out differently? This part of the story.
She could have
Rahab
turned
could
the men
have
over.
turned the men over.
Yeah.
The 2 spies that Joshua sent could have disobeyed their orders and gone somewhere else. That could have happened as well, since there was an issue with that before, if I remember correctly. So it could have happened in this setting as well.
Yeah.
The king's men could have done a better job of searching Rahab's house.
Rahab could have turned them in. That was a brave, she had a certain sense of a bravery there, or courage, shall we say, to hide them and misdirect the king's men.
I'm wondering why was she identified as the harlot?
So in Hebrew, the term used to describe her is Isha Zona, which generally is used to describe a prostitute. Later rabbinic commentators, some of them had trouble with this and described her as an innkeeper who sold bread, and they connected it to another use of the root Zion Nun, meaning food, like Hazan, not Chazan, but Hazan or Mazon, meaning food. So they're like, oh, look, she's a food provider. But the pshat, the simple literal meaning of the text, indicates that she would have been a prostitute.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The story says that the king was told 2 men had gone to Jericho. How did they know whose house they went to? They went to look for the 2 men.
Well, either they had intelligence that is not given to us, or they sent orders to everybody and we're only told about the orders that our particular focus received. I'm guessing it's the first one more than the second.
Wasn't her house in the wall?
Wasn't
Yes.
she in the perimeter of the city and so could have easily been the first house they came to?
That's true.
David,
Mm-hmm.
are you going to give us the midrash about that? It's all about the most beautiful women because you know the male rabbis cared, like Sarah, even at the age of 90, was so alluring. But the one about Rahav, where saying her name put her in a
Yes.
special category. We're going to get there because then I'll be quiet.
It's in the appendix with the other Talmudic saying stories. All right, let's go on to question 2. Why might Joshua have only sent 2 spies this time? And why might their names not have been written down while Rahab's was? So in the previous version, the story in the Torah in the book of Numbers, Moses sends 12 spies, including Joshua, and we know all their names. There's one from each tribe, each of them are named. Here, Joshua only sends 2 spies, and also we don't know their names. We only know Rahab's name. Discuss.
Well, I think Rahab is the only one that did anything really extraordinary in this. The spies did not do a good job, but Rahab is the one that took action and made a plan and executed it, whereas the spies feel very secondary and like, who cares?
Yeah, and you're saying that they didn't do a good job because their presence was detected?
Yeah, because their presence was detected, and that, yeah.
Okay. I mean, that is a key part of the job of being a spy, is don't let people know that you're spying on them.
Yeah, if they were tracked so easily.
That's true. Other thoughts?
Perhaps it's because the spies were reliant on Rahab, and the coming successes of the various Israelite campaigns wouldn't have even been possible without this initial sort of protection that she had given them. But the events that would have been able to follow after wouldn't have happened the same way, or may not have happened at all.
Yeah.
So it could be recognizing her importance for the future, maybe, as to why her name is mentioned but the others aren't.
Yeah.
I'm somewhat amused that they could just cover up the spies with some flax fronds, and that's all it took to hide them on top of this roof. I don't know, I just find that very amusing.
I wonder if the reason why it was only 2 is because when the 10 spies that Moshe sent out said that the land was filled with giants and will never overtake it, that the Israelites were terrified and willing to stay back. Whereas if it had just been 2 spies that said this is really not so safe, they may not have been as frenzied about entering Canaan.
Yeah. Josh was learning from his own experience.
Or there could not have been a majority opinion, because if they didn't agree, it'd only be 1-1. It wouldn't be a majority against it.
Well, you're also less obtrusive if there's only 2 people instead of a group of people walking together, or that have to infiltrate a few at a time. And if you're coming in off of the desert, then you may have clothing or some characteristics, even a small community, you know most everybody there one way or the other, at least you're acquainted. And if these folks aren't from the area, it might be little bit obvious that these people aren't they're strangers. And you know, they already knew that the Israelites were camped across the river at the ford.
Is there any commentary why? Is there any commentary why they were sent only to reconnoiter the region of Jericho and not the entire land? Because supposedly God was giving them the entire land.
Yeah. So I think the reason is because I believe, and I will check this quickly, I believe they were camped across from Jericho. Hold on. All right, I'm not seeing that in the Haftorah for Simchat Torah, which is the previous, it's chapter 1 of Joshua, so right before this. But we know that they are camped across, we know from later on that they're camped across from Jericho. And so because that's where they've chosen to cross the Jordan River, going to have to go past Jericho to get into the rest of the land. It's the gatekeeper for the route they've chosen. So they're going to be noticed anyway if they're crossing at that point. And it looks like, and if they are able to get through Jericho, moving in will be significantly easier. But it's a good question.
So this
Interesting
is a question I have because I don't quite remember, but the first set of spies, they were like a decade or two prior to this, right?
Years.
4.
I mean, it was a long time before these spies were sent over because Joshua was a much younger man. And that was when they first arrived across the Jordan for the first set, right? And so this is the question I have because I don't know the answer to this. So is it possible that the first set was larger because they had a larger geographic area that they were spying out, whereas in this case, they were just spying out Jericho?
That's possible. I don't think that they were camped across from Jericho the last time. I could be wrong, but I think they might have been elsewhere on the border with the land of Israel. I'll see what I can find about that. And they stayed all together. So it's possible that,
oh, they did? I couldn't remember. Yeah.
Which is part of why it's important that when they bring back different findings, it can't be described as, oh, well, we saw one thing and you were somewhere else and you saw something else. They were all together, they all saw the same thing. But otherwise, it would have been a good interpretation. What?
I find it interesting that when Moses sent 12 spies, they were never noticed, as far as the text tells us. But they were sent 2 spies, they were noticed.
Yeah.
They were closer to entering the land at this point, though. So if they were noticed in the first time, the second couldn't have happened. I think.
I know it also says somewhere, and again, I can't remember timeline, but I know it says somewhere around one of the spy stories that the people of the land had heard of what God had done for the people, and they were afraid because of it. And I don't remember if it was the first set of spies or the second set of spies. And that may have also made them, if it was the second set, it may have also made them respond more cautiously to the infiltration, so to speak, than the first time. But if it was the first time, then that doesn't apply.
Yeah, it was the second time. Your point is well taken. All right, let's go on to the next question. How might the spies have felt when they heard their location had been discovered?
Scared.
Maybe ashamed.
He certainly let Rahab tell them what to do.
I'm curious about what you said, Stacy. You think spies are ashamed? I wonder.
Yeah, I mean, they totally failed. Like I said, you know, they were caught and
Ashamed of that, not ashamed of what they were doing.
Well,
Okay.
that
Right.
too.
I
That
got-
yes,
Okay.
levels of that. But you know, especially with something with such high stakes, it's like, God, you know, this seems like a time not to mess up.
Yeah, what other thoughts?
David,
Yeah.
yes, are you, in your question, I mean, it's sort of answered in the next few verses. I don't know if you're planning to go on reading them or not, so.
Well, we are going on, but working with what we have in front of us.
Fair enough, then I don't have anything to add. Thanks.
Okay.
So I actually,
I was thinking like maybe their technique or training, they may have felt that it was flawed, because I don't just think that Joshua just sent them out without any training. So therefore, maybe their training, the way that they do things, that it was flawed, so it allowed them to be noticed.
But I thank you for that, Joseph. But I also have a thought that maybe a difference between the previous spy experience, which was basically out in the countryside, and what was going on here is that these guys actually went into the city of Jericho, and in a walled city, and of course there were not huge populations in those days, it doesn't strike me, it has never struck me in the past as being all that exceptional that two strangers who probably didn't look like the Canaanites living there at the time would be noticed in the city in a way that even 12 spies all over the land of Israel would not have been noticed out in the countryside.
So they were all, what language was everybody speaking? If they could identify who was how they were communicating, if they were, even if we all speak English in the US, if I go from one region to another, from one part of Chicago to another, I can tell if you're from the south side or the north side. Think about that. If you can identify somebody, is a stranger or not.
It's a good
point.
point.
What language were they speaking? Hebrew was was it Hebrew? Were the people in Jericho, were they speaking Hebrew?
Probably. It probably didn't help their case.
Sorry. Never mind. Oh, well, related to that about languages, I had I had read somewhere that Hebrew is classified as a Canaanite language, and that basically all dialects that were spoken in the area were, well, basically dialects of one language, practically speaking. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So would Israelites
Probably.
have been, would they have been identified just by like accent, maybe, in the way that we would identify speakers of English by accent, potentially? Like between each other?
That's what I was trying to stimulate that thought.
Yeah.
Yes.
I see.
Potentially. Yeah. All right, so the parallel question, well, my internet tries to figure out what it's doing, is how might Rachav have felt when the soldiers came to her door? And why didn't she choose to turn in the spies?
Well, I don't know the answer is why she didn't turn in the spies, but given her apparent profession, hiding men in her house probably is something that she would be familiar with having to have to do at some point within that situation. So probably having the soldiers come and be like, probably been in that experience before, would be my guess.
I was thinking maybe she has something against her own people, you know, because of what she was labeled as possibly, but we don't know what she been through. But maybe she has some against her own people, and probably she knew that like Israel was greater also, and that they wasn't gonna be able to beat them. So I'm thinking like on those 2 points, maybe she could have had something against her own people, or she probably just felt that, you know, Israel was greater.
Could be.
Might have lost David for a minute.
Did we lose David?
It says he is the host. And I saw something about me being a co-host, and I have no idea how to be a co-host.
Your sound is
bringing back
really
the source
low.
There we go. We hear you, David.
All right.
Do we see you? Now we see you. Yay.
So, meanwhile, the question still remains. Why didn't Rachav turn them in? Or why might she not have?
Because he might have arrested her for hiding them.
May have arrested her for having to do some foreigners. And then my question is, how did they arrive at her house? Just by happenstance, or did they have some sense that she might be a source of information or refuge, or they were just up to just being mischievous? But even then, how would you know where to go to in a strange town where you would go to be mischievous?
Maybe she had a reputation, Charles, and they knew. Maybe she had a reputation and they knew about her.
Well,
and since they were spies and she was a prostitute, maybe they felt they, had some kind of connection.
Could be. Or you're coming into town and someone says, "Oh," or they're asking, "Where can I get something to drink and some lodging and refreshment or whatever?" And maybe as part of the activity, the lady offered some refreshment and some lodging if you're traveling through.
Another thing to consider with all this is that she was living in the wall. I don't know how many of you have actually been in Israel to see the way the ancient cities like Jericho were built, but the walls have an inner, the city walls have an inner surface and an outer surface, and in between there is enough space for small houses, literally right in those walls. So I've always thought that one reason that the spies wound up there is because it was the first place they could duck out of sight into a habitation that wasn't, clearly you didn't have to worry about dealing with an angry guy.
Mhm.
And the fact that she is able to let them out through her
The window.
it's because she is literally between the inner and outer wall of that part of the city.
Well, speaking about that, at a higher elevation, it gives you a better vantage point to scout out the city. So I can see that. That would be a motivation, certainly. But David, you said, how do people identify your house? Way back then, not everybody read. Maybe there was some sort of symbol of advertising, the same way as in Pompeii. I'm through reading about that, and that was later on. But you had symbols for if it's a place to eat or different services or different activities. I suppose.
David, is this connected with your question tonight? How do you know it's your house? Is this connected to this?
Yes. That's what I'm doing.
Let's go on to.
I think so. How do we know? How do they know it was their house? How do we know it was my house or your house?
It's impossible not to say that. It's a red ribbon district. That's the possible answer.
That is fabulous. Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, the red ribbon. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Let's go on to Act 2. Gary, are you feeling up to reading tonight? Let's see.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Can you enlarge it? The English I think is large.
You might be able to on your end if you press Command plus.
Let me see.
Or pinch and expand.
Let me see. Well, let's try it. I went full screen. Joshua 2:8-21.
Yep.
The spies had not yet gone to sleep when she came up to them on the roof. She said to the men, I know that God has given the country to you because dread of you has fallen upon us, and all the inhabitants of the land are quaking before you. For we have heard how God dried up the waters of the Red Sea of Reeds for you when you left Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two Amorite kings across the Jordan, whom you doomed. When we heard about it, we lost heart, and no one had any more spirit left because of you. For the eternal, your God, is the only God in heaven and above and on earth below. Now, since I have shown loyalty to you, swear to me by God that you in turn will show loyalty to my family. Provide me with a reliable sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them. I lost it.
Up at the top now.
Oh, okay. And save us from death. The men answered her, our lives are pledged for yours, even to death. If you do not disclose this mission of ours, we will show you true loyalty when God gives us the land. She let them down by rope through the window, for her dwelling was at the outer side of the city wall, and she lived in the actual wall. She said to them, make for the hills, so that the pursuers may not come upon you. Stay there in hiding 3 days until the pursuers return. Then go your way. But the men warned her, we will be released from this oath that you have made us take, unless, when we invade the country, you tie its length of crimson cord to the window through which you let us down. Bring your father, your mother, your brothers, and all your family together in your house. And if anyone ventures outside the doors of your house, their blood will be on their head. They shall be responsible for their own death, and we shall be clear. But if a hand is laid on anyone who remains inside in the house with you, their blood shall be on our heads. And if you disclose this mission of ours, we shall likewise be released from the oath that you made us take. She replied, let it be as you say. She sent them on their way, and they left. She tied the crimson cord to the window.
Okay, thank you.
You
All
bet.
right. So before we keep going, I'm noting that it is about 11 minutes to 9. We have 2 options. Option 1, we can get a little bit further this week and then continue next week. Option 2, I can speed this up and we can wrap this up tonight. Do you guys have a preference?
You want to keep us in anxiety until next week to see how this turns out?
Or you could go to Synagogue and read the Haftorah for yourselves.
But we won't have the benefit of all this exchange of ideas.
That's true. Kiddush discussion, I guess.
Because you could read the Haftorah anytime, and but then I won't have this stimulating conversation to open up my perspectives.
I'd say continue next week.
I say
Yeah.
that too. I agree.
I have to get to bed early.
Yeah, I like that because then there'll be more discussion.
Okay, so we will continue moving at our current pace. Great. So in that case, this part of the story that we just read is the next part of the story, as you might have figured out. And the first question will be the same as our Act 1 question was. History and stories are not inevitable. People and authors make choices. At what points could this part of the story have turned out differently?
She could have just told them to go on their way and not told them anything. Or she could have told them, asked what she wanted, and they could have said no.
Well, they certainly did now know that all of the things that God did for them has turned the fear of God into this other people, the ones they need to examine, and how they knew that I'm not sure, but that would certainly change the story if she didn't know all this.
How was she going to fit all her relatives into this very small house that she has in the wall?
That's a good question.
Well, we don't know what size it was. It's between the 2 walls. You don't know how long it is. How wide? What's the separation between the 2 walls?
Probably a few feet, I would think, maybe 6 feet, 4 to 6 feet.
I've seen city walls over there. I can vouch for the fact that they were at least 10 feet apart.
Oh, that's not too bad.
No, I mean, you got a 9 by 12 bedroom. That's considered fine to accommodate somebody.
You know, this is not a direct response to the question, but I used to do contract fulfillment for IBM. And as you were reading this, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they could not have laid out more of a verbal contract than they did to Rahab. It was like, really? It was all the clauses you would expect in a contract, and I just found it humorous. I'm just tossing that in.
Yeah.
Maybe they were lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
Or the people who wrote this down centuries later who were lawyers.
That's true too.
Any other ways that this part of the story might have turned out differently?
Why did she tell him to hide 3 days? How did she know the pursuers would return at that point?
Unclear. I can see if there's commentary on the matter. Possibly that was standard practice. And as somebody who lived in the wall, she had seen other pursuits. But I don't know.
I have one more question. Okay, it says she hid them on the roof, right? But did they actually search her house? Because when they asked her, it just said that she replied and told them that they was there, but they left. And if they didn't search their house, is it certain type of rules or whatever, like entering into someone's house that's a harlot or something like that? I was just thinking about it.
Well, she told them to hurry up so they could catch them. They could still catch them if they hurried up. They wouldn't have taken the time out to search the house, I wouldn't think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if she truly was a prostitute, they probably knew her in some regard, whether they used her services or not. She was probably very well known. B, she was probably frequented by people who were well known and powerful in the city. And they may not have wanted to interrupt some of those people, assuming she was a prostitute. So just a couple of thoughts. Don't know if it's true or not, but they're my thoughts.
Certainly sounds reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
We know that she recites like formulas of what we would call a Jewish belief. Your God is the only God, heaven and earth, and all of that is recited here out of her mouth. So she's saying, I'm on your side.
In every way.
So there's integrity on both sides. She fulfills their request by hiding them and lying and taking some level of risk, and they are true to their promise in return. And her rationale seems to be a thoughtful, sort of intellectual one. In other words, she's resisting the pursuers because she thinks the Israelite culture is superior, and that there's evidence for that through God. Right? So she comes across as a thoughtful rebel, really, who is deliberately challenging authority. And she's definitely looking for the invaders to recognize her and her family in return, which just feels like oh goodness, a constantly repeated story through the millennia, right? As powerful people try to conquer each other, there's always these kinds of dynamics. It's kind of a sweet story, and it's also kind of a cartoon story. You know, you can imagine the music revving up as the guys rush into her house, and she puts them on the roof and she covers them with the flax, and then the pursuers come and they don't see them and they overlook them. And I mean, the whole thing has kind of a fable quality too. But I think that integrity is important. When you ask about what could have gone differently, there could have been lack of integrity on either side. She could have betrayed them, and they could have left her behind without compunction.
But she seems to be in doing things in self-interest. In other words, she's not just guessing that they are superior. She has evidence, and she is basically saying there's no way I can possibly lose here. If I help them, likely they will help me as well, and certainly she gets that that feeling, and she believes it, which I think I agree with Cindy that it seems to be a pretty even-handed self-interest situation. However, in my view, they profit from her and she profits from them because she has good evidence that they have this God.
All right, so that is a good place for us to stop for this evening.